Okay, well, welcome to the last readings of Joshua. We're in the last 4 chapters. So we'll be ending today with the book of Joshua, and then next time we'll be starting the book of Judges. So today is just 4 chapters. It's chapter 20 through 24. And what I would like to do is just give you some highlights on the first 2 chapters because I want to concentrate on the last two. Because in the last 2 chapters, Joshua is giving his farewell speech to the people, to the congregation, and also it's a renewal of the covenant. Okay, remember that the covenant is only one covenant. Only one covenant from Adam to Yeshua. It's just renewed and renewed every time there's either a change of leadership or something big happens, like for example, when leadership went from Moses to Joshua, there was a renewal of the covenant. And now that Joshua is at the end of his life, there's also renewal of the covenant. And now they're in the land that had been promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So even though sometimes you hear that people say there's 7 covenants, there's 8 covenants, it's really one covenant. It's just given, renewed at different times depending on the person that's the leader or whatever's going on with the land and the people of Israel. Okay? So in chapter 20, what we have is the description of the cities of refuge. Remember that according to the Torah, there had to be 6 cities of refuge, 3 on the west and 3 on the east. Okay, and the purpose of having a city of refuge was if someone unintentionally killed another person, the family of that person that was killed would want to seek revenge to avoid killing someone that was innocent because it was an accident. They were allowed to go to a city of refuge. Now there was a process. Once the individual got to the gate of the city of refuge, there were elders, leaders at the gate, and so they kind of did like a pre-trial, in a sense, to make sure, do we let this person in or not? Once that person was in, eventually there was a full judgment, okay, to make sure that this individual was not guilty of killing intentionally, but unintentionally, and to avoid also that the family of the person that was killed to take revenge. And the person is called the avenger is called the blood avenger. Or the blood redeemer.
The one, the family?
The family. The family that goes after the individual that killed accidentally the other person. Okay, so it is if it's unintentional. If the individual killed somebody intentionally, what was the punishment for killing somebody? You were death. Basically, you paid with your life. But if it was unintentional, the individual could go to the city of refuge, and there were 6 of them, 3 on the east of the Jordan and 3 on the west of Jordan. And so when you read chapter 20, it gives you all the details of the cities. And in chapter 21, what's going on is that the Levites are requesting from Eleazar, the high priest, and from Joshua that they get cities to live in. Remember that the Levites did not have an inheritance of land. They didn't have property that was given to them because their inheritance was Yahweh. The Lord was the inheritance of the Levites. So what they're doing is they're asking that each tribal people, the tribes, that they would set aside land or cities for the Levites. Why? Because they had families, they had their own animals, they had the opportunity to sow and grow their own food. So they needed a place to live. So basically, the people is responsible of taking care of the Levite. Why? Because the Levite is the minister and is the the mediator between God and the people. Okay, the boss is Yahweh. And so the Lord takes care of them through the people. The people have to take care of the Levites. And so eventually, if you read, you'll see that so many tribes gave so much land to all the Levites. And in verse 41 of chapter 21, it says that all the cities of the Levites in the midst of the possessions of the sons of Israel were 48 cities with their pasture lands. These cities each had its surrounding pasture lands, thus it was with all these cities. So a total of 48 cities were given to the Levites. So basically the Levites were spread through all the tribes because that was the purpose. To have Levites in every, basically, 41 of chapter 21. Yeah, verse 41 of chapter 21. And then verses 43 through 45, it says, So the Lord gave Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side according to all that he had sworn to their fathers, and no one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. So basically, he's saying that once the people got all the land, and remember that not everything was conquered, but still what was conquered during that time, they were able to live in it peacefully, because it was according to the promises of the Lord. So where it says that none of the good promises is basically in Hebrew says none of the good word that the Lord spoke to them failed. And where it says failed in Hebrew says lo nafal. Lo nafal, which basically means none of the word that he spoke fell. Basically fell to the ground or fell and was not fulfilled. Now, yes, ma'am.
Verse 44, God gave them rest. What is in Hebrew is rest here? Noach or Shabbat?
Noach. Noach. It's not Shabbat, it's Noach. Comfort, they were comfortable. They were at rest in that sense. Okay. Now let's go to chapter 22. No, I'm sorry, in chapter 22, what we have is that the people, remember that the people from the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, they stayed at the east of Jordan, but while their brothers were getting settled, they helped to conquer the other side of the Jordan, the west side of the Jordan. So everybody's now settled, so now they're ready to go back to their land where they had left their families and their children. And during that time, once the people were, the tribes that were on the east side of the Jordan, remember it's Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh. When they crossed back to their east side, which was their homes were and their families, they decided to build an altar at the Jordan, basically kind of in between the settlements on the east and the settlements on the west. So what's going on? The people think the other tribes are on the west side. Remember, these are the most. Okay, so there's 2.5 here, so the rest are on the west side. They think, how dare they build an altar? They think that they're building an altar maybe to another god or in rebellion. So the people get upset and they go and meet them and say, and Eleazar the priest and Joshua tell them, what the heck are you doing? Are you going to cause rebellion towards Yahweh? This is going to cause that all the tribes be punished by the Lord. And they're like, no, wait, hold it. What we did is we put this altar as a memorial and a witness that even though we're on this side and you're on that side, we're still one people and we still believe in one God and that's it. So it wasn't until they were able to communicate their purpose of having that altar, the altar was for the purpose of being a witness, that even though the Jordan divided them, they were really not divided. That Yahweh was still their God. It was the God that promised the land, gave them the land, fought for them, and so now they're settled, and it was a memorial. So everybody now was happy because they understood that the altar was not, like remember later when we study what happened with one of the kings, I think it was Jeroboam, what he did is he built altars in Dan and in Bethel, but they were used to worship in a way that was not the way that the Lord wanted. So this is different. This is not because they didn't build the altar for sacrifices. They didn't build the altar to do ceremonies on it. They didn't build the altar because they understood that the tabernacle that at this time was in Shiloh, that was the place where the Lord would meet with the people, and that was his sacred space. Okay, so they're saying this altar is not for offerings and ceremonies and doing, no, this is just a memorial and a witness that Yahweh is our God. Okay, and that we're still all one people. Even though the Jordan divides us, we're still one people. Okay? Any questions on those first chapter 20, 21, or 22 before I go to 23?
Yeah, I want to ask you this Kohen Eliezer. Who is he? Whose son is he?
Of Aaron.
Aaron?
Yeah.
Another left two sons among them?
Yeah. But really the line of priesthood, of high priesthood, really always kind of stood out through the line of Eliezer. Because through the line of Eliezer we have Zadok, and Zadok is the high priest when David is king. So basically it was through the line of Eliezer that dominated the priesthood. Okay, and after Eliezer dies, his son Pinchas is the high priest. Okay, so let's go to chapter 23. And it says, "Now it came about after many days when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their enemies on every side, and Joshua was old, advanced in years, that Joshua called for all Israel, for their elders and their heads and their judges and their officers, and said to them," one thing that I want to clarify is when it says all Israel, is not every single individual, woman, man, and child, but the representatives, which are the elders, the heads, their judges, and their officers. The representative of the people, that is what's called all Israel. Okay? Because why? They represent the people. So basically, Joshua speaks to them, and then they go back and say the same words to the rest of the people. Okay? Because usually when they say all Israel, we assume that all 3 million people were at the house when Joshua is about to die. I don't think that's the way it happens. And he says, "I am old, advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations because of you. For the Lord your God is he who has been fighting for you." So remember that every time a leader or a father is about to die, he calls forth his family and says like final words. And basically every time they speak is speaking about blessing and is speaking about giving them guidance of what to do and not to do. And so here he's speaking and calling the people and letting them know that everything that has happened up to this point is because of Yahweh. Yahweh is the one that fought for them. Verse 4, "See, I have apportioned to you these nations which remain as an inheritance for your tribes, with all the nations which I have cut off, from the Jordan even to the great sea, toward the setting of the sun. The Lord your God, he will thrust them out from before you and drive them from before you, and you will possess their land, just as the Lord your God promised you." So God is the one fighting. God is the one that has promised. Because remember that even though they're settled, there was still land that was not conquered. Okay, so, and we think that this just happened like one day and in a week or two. This is years. All this happening is happening in years. And remember that by the time Joshua is already leading the people, he's already in his 80s. Okay. It says, verse 6, be very firm then to keep and do all that is written in the book of the Torah of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the right hand or to the left, so that you will not associate with these nations, these which remain among you, or mention the name of their gods, or make anyone swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. So Joshua is telling them to avoid idolatry. And idolatry would come if they mixed with the people that are still left of those nations. So he's telling them, don't mix with them. Verse 8, but you are to cling to the Lord your God as you have done to this day. For the Lord has driven out great and strong nations from before you. And as for you, no man has stood before you to this day. One of your men puts to flight 1,000. For the Lord your God is he who fights for you, just as he promised you. So take diligent heed to yourselves to love the Lord your God. For if you ever go back and cling to the rest of these nations, these which remain among you, and intermarry with them, so that you associate with them and they with you, know with certainty that the Lord your God will not continue to drive these nations out from before you, but they will be a snare and a trap to you, and a whip on your sides and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from off this good land which the Lord your God has given you. So basically it kind of sounds like what Moses told them right before he died. He said, don't do this, because this is what's going to happen. So in other words, even though they're in the land, and the Lord is the one that's fighting for them, and the Lord is the one that's accomplishing the promises that he gave, they still have to obey the Torah, the commandments, live according to the commandments that the Lord had given them. Not to intermarry. Why? Because remember that if they married these foreign women, they would be subject to the gods of those foreign nations. So that would be committing idolatry, which is also spiritual adultery. Because remember that the people are betrothed to God, and betrothal is marriage. So if they go after other gods, they're committing spiritual adultery. Verse 14 of chapter 23, it says, now behold, today I am going the way of all the earth. It's a nice way of saying I'm dying. And you know in all your hearts and in all your souls that not one word of all the good words which the Lord your God spoke concerning you has failed. All have been fulfilled for you. Not one of them has failed. It shall come about that just as all the good words which the Lord your God spoke to you have come upon you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the threats, until he has destroyed you from off this good land which the Lord your God has given you. When you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, then the anger of the Lord will burn against you, and you will perish quickly from off the good land which he has given you. In other words, if they don't do what they're supposed to do, they'll be kicked out of the land. Remember that the land is a gift of the king. No one can take it away, but if you don't do what you're supposed to do, he has the right to kick you out. And remember that in this culture, in this time, if a nation is driven out after the land has been given to the people, all the rest of the nations understand that it was their God who kicked them out because they did not obey. So it would bring shame upon them. Remember that I have said that exile is shameful. It's a shame to be out of the land that the Lord has promised us. So living here in Brandon, Florida is shameful in that sense, because we should all be in the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So eventually. Okay, chapter 24. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem. Why Shechem? Because in Shechem or Shiloh is the tabernacle. Remember that they roamed around with the tabernacle all through the desert, and when they come to the promised land, they settle it in Shechem, in the area called Shiloh. Okay, so the tabernacle stands there for many hundreds of years, I think approximately 400 years before the first temple, the permanent temple, is built. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel and for their heads and their judges and their officers. And they presented themselves before God. Remember that these people represent the rest of the congregation. Verse 2, Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel." So now Joshua is speaking on behalf of the Lord. So he goes through a review of all the things that he has done. Why? Because remember that the purpose of writing these books is not so much to see what the people of Israel did, but to see what the God of Israel did for the people. It's to exalt him. It's to give him the glory, the honor, and the praise, not the people. He uses the people to fulfill his will, but all the honor and the glory goes to God. Okay? So as Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods." Right there is telling you what the father of Abraham used to do, and all the family of Abraham. Therefore, Abraham, as a child, grew up in a house where they were very pagan. So when he's called out by Yahweh and he says, "Get out of there and go to the land that I will show you," that was huge. Really huge. It's like when you say to your family, "Now I'm Messianic. I don't eat pork. I don't do this. I don't do that." They're like, "What? You're nuts." I'm sure he had got the same thing. So it says, verse 3 of chapter 24, "Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and to Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it. But Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt by what I did in its midst. And afterward I brought you out. I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea. And Egypt pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. But when they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and brought the sea upon them and covered them. And your own eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you lived in the wilderness for a long time. Then I brought you into the land of the Amorites who lived beyond the Jordan, and they fought with you, and I gave them into your hand, and you took possession of their land when I destroyed them before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and fought against Israel, and he sent and summoned Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. But I was not willing to listen to Balaam. So he had to bless you, and I delivered you from his hand. You crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. And the citizens of Jericho fought against you, and the Amorite, and the Perizzite, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusites, and all the ites. Thus I gave them into your hand. Then I sent the hornet before you, and it drove out the 2 kings of the Amorites from before you, but not by your sword or your bow. Now the hornet in this culture, it was understood that the hornet was something that was sent by the gods against the enemies. It was like a terror. Okay, so the hornet, that's what that signifies. It's not like you saw all these hornets flying around and stinging everybody. It's like an idiom to say that your God is fighting for you, and so he's putting in terror into your enemy. Okay? But he tells them, but not by your sword or your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them. You are eating of vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant. Remember that it takes a long time to have a vineyard produce fruit, and a long time for olive groves to give you olives. But when they come into the land, that already was there. Verse 14. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth. In the Hebrew it says in Tamim and Emet. Tamim and Emet. Remember that Tamim means complete. That your whole being is completely faithful and loyal to the Lord and in truth. That there's nothing inside of you that will bring forth unfaithfulness, that will bring forth unloyalty. So it's really, what they translated sincerity is Tamim. Tamim was Noah when the Lord found him and he found grace before the eyes of the Lord. Noah was Tamim. Okay, so Tamim means that your heart is completely with the Lord, that there's nothing inside of you that is not willing to obey him. So now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom will you serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Again, it's about choice. It's about choice. There's always a choice. From the moment you wake up, you have the choice to stay in bed or the choice to get out of bed and do what you have to do. There's always a choice. So Joshua's telling them, you have a choice. You can either serve the gods of this land right now, or you can serve the gods that our forefathers, the parents of Abraham, served, or you can serve Yahweh, who has fought for you, who has given you the land that he promised, who has been faithful. Now verse 16 is important. It says, the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God is he who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, and who did these great signs in our sight, and preserved us through all the way in which we went, and among all the peoples through whose midst we passed. The Lord drove out from before us all the peoples, even the Amorites who lived in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. This is an oath, people. This is a renewal of the covenant. And what Joshua is doing with the people is having them verbally renew the covenant with Yahweh. So basically they're saying, like they did at Mount Sinai, we will do whatever he says we need to do. They said, I do. And once you say I do, you did. Okay. Verse 19. Then Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgression or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after he has done good to you. And the people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen for yourselves the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. Now therefore put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. The people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God, and we will obey his voice. This is the third time they have said that they will serve the Lord and obey him. 3 times, the oath. Verse 25, so Joshua made a covenant with the people that day, and made for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the Torah of God, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. Remember that trees are not allowed in the temple. Why? Because the people use the trees to go under the trees and worship other gods. That's what they call the Asherah trees, or the. They did all sorts of wicked stuff under the trees. So in the temple, you will never see trees. There can be trees outside of the boundaries of the temple. So he establishes a stone as a memorial where there's a tree outside of the area where the tabernacle is. And he says, he puts that down as a witness. It says, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. Joshua said to all the people, behold, this stone shall be for a witness against us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord which he spoke to us. Thus it shall be for a witness against you, so that you do not deny your God. Then Joshua dismissed the people, each to his inheritance. So here Joshua is saying something that it was not until recent that science proved that stones and bones absorb sound. So that stone, wherever that stone is right now in Shechem, heard the words of this covenant, and it still has it in it. So that's why it's important when you speak to be careful how you speak. Because we think you say words and they disappear. Nuh-uh. Those words stay in the bones of the person to whom you directed those words. If they're words of blessing, it's blessing in their life. If it's words of cursing or words of stupid things we say, the same thing. So these stones that were there in Shechem, if you've ever been to Shechem or go to Shechem, you can make sure that all those stones heard this covenant that was being proclaimed in this time. It was Joshua. And so it says that Joshua dismissed the people and each one went to their inheritance. Verse 29. So this was a renewal of the covenant. And the people 3 times said that they will obey and serve the Lord God. Okay? Verse 29. It came about after these things that Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord. This is the first time that Joshua is called the servant of the Lord. The same way that Moses was called the servant of the Lord. The son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died being 110 years old. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, on the north of Mount Gaash. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, and had known all the deeds of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Remember that this is the second generation that has had a chance to see how the Lord fulfilled the promise of the land and fulfilled fighting for them, conquering the land. One thing that we have to understand is that the Lord, when they were coming in, he said, I have given you the land. Go and possess it. Okay? Because it's you need, in a marriage, you need 2 people for it to be a marriage, right? Even though today you got crazy people marrying the sea and the dogs and the cats and whatever, but it's like if I say, Asha, this water is yours. I have given you this water. It is your property. Take it. Take it. You have to get up and take it. You're going to show me that you believe what I have told you by getting up and taking possession of it. It's already yours. The land is yours, but you have to get up and show me that you have believed that I have given you the land. That no matter what you go through, the fighting, whatever it is yours, you know, if he has given you a promise, and even through all the struggles and all the tribulation and whatever, you know this is yours, you know that you're going to make it to be able to take it. I wish to put that on a t-shirt. You know you'll make it to be able to take it. Okay? And that's faith. Faith is action, is believing what the Lord has told you, but it's not, you can't wait to say, okay, Asha, this is yours, and then I come and bring you the water. That don't show no faith. The faith is, Asha, this water is yours. Come and take it. Yeah. That's why Abraham, he said, okay, Abraham, I have this awesome land for you. Go. He didn't say, I don't have a map. I don't have a compass. I don't have, He did it. Because you show him, you show the Lord that you believe in him, in his words, when you take action on behalf of the words that he has said. So if he has given you a promise in your life, it could have been 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you know you're going to reach it because he promised it to you. But in the meantime, between where she's at and the water, there's stuff you have to go through. Okay? But if you believe in that word, you know you're going to make it and take it. I got to do a t-shirt with that. Okay, so it says, verse 32, now they buried the bones of Joseph. Remember, Joseph, they've been wandering around with the bones of Joseph all this time. They got him in a little bag, baggie, like a, doggy bag. And it says, Israel, and then they buried the bones of Joseph, which the sons of Israel brought up from Egypt at Shechem, in the piece of ground which Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money. And they became the inheritance of Joseph's sons. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died. And they buried him at Gibeah of Pinchas, his son, which was given him in the hill country of Ephraim. So in Ephraim we have Joseph, we have Joshua, and now we have Eleazar. If you've ever been to Israel and you've been to what they call the heartland of Israel, which is Samaria and Judea, where I don't know if you remember that couple that came like 2 years ago, Rabbi Moshe and his wife Leah. They live in Itamar, and Shechem is close to where they live. So in that area, when you go up to their kibbutz, you go on one side you have Ephraim, and on another side you have Manasseh. So somewhere there, these people were buried. So, this is it's the true heartland of Israel where the patriarchs were buried. So we have here that Joshua dies, and Eleazar, the high priest, dies, and Pinchas is now the high priest. And so basically they have settled, and for the meantime, everything is going fine and well until we get to the book of Judges, which will be next time. Any questions about Joshua? I know that I can't stay too long in one verse or one topic, because if not, we'll never finish. If our plan is to go through the whole Bible, but that doesn't mean that you can take time to go back and research. If there's something that took brought attention to you, was something that you were interested in, you can research it more and look more about it. So that was the book of Joshua. Okay, so now we'll be going to Judges. Yes, ma'am.